Good morning, P6. Welcome to Monday's Maths. Today we're going to think about, for our warm-up, some multiplication tables and our dividing facts. Because every day this week we are going to take a tables challenge. The tables have been mixed up for you, and what I want you to do every day this week is see how your knowledge of your tables is. Is it really good? Can you complete this quite quickly? Or is it maybe not so good and maybe you need to spend a little bit more time revising your multiplying and your dividing facts? So every day this week we're going to have a times table challenge, and it looks a bit like this. We're going to be using our Numeracy Ninjas. Numeracy Ninja is something you're going to use a lot in P7, and every day you're going to have 60 questions to try and work out the answers to. Now there is a box in every question and there's a missing number. That missing number might be the answer that goes after the equal sign, but it could be something that comes before the equal sign. So can you work out what the missing number is in each and every question and have a go at that? Now, if you're good at your tables for this week are all mixed up. But if you find your tables more tricky, then every day we're going to concentrate on a different table. And for today, it's the 2 times table. So if you choose to do the lower level task, all your questions are about multiplying and dividing by 2. Take a little bit of time today, P6, to go over your tables, okay? Now, our main activity for today is all to do with decimals. So let's take a moment to revise what we've already done before we stopped for half term. So we have been learning a little bit about decimal fractions, and we start off by thinking about one whole thing. So if I've got one whole shape that has been divided into 10 parts, well, if I've got all 10 of those 10 parts together, I can say that I've got one whole, I can say that I've got one unit, I could also write it as 1.0. Now that 1.0 also means that I've got 10 out of the 10 parts, 10 tenths, or I could write 10 tenths that way. They both say 10 tenths. So each and every one of these sections is 1/10 of the whole thing. The whole thing has been divided into 10 equal parts. Each one of them is 1/10. Now I can write 1/10 as an ordinary fraction with a numerator and a denominator. 1 tells me how many parts I'm looking at, just 1 out of 10. The denominator tells me how many parts altogether. So I could write 1/10, meaning 1 out of 10 parts, but I could also write it as what's called a decimal fraction. And a decimal fraction is simply written where we would put a 0 at the start. We've got a 0 because if I'm only looking at that 1 out of the 10 parts, I'm not looking at the whole thing. So no whole shapes, but I'm looking at 1 out of the 10 parts, 0.1. Now, if I was looking at 4 of the parts, so if I decided not just to look at one of them, but if I was looking at 4 of those 10 parts, then I could say I've got 4/10, or to write that as a decimal, that would become 0.4. Now, what we also started doing then was we started thinking about what's called place value. And we thought about using our headings, units, decimal point, tenths. So if I write down the number 1.7, what does 1.7 mean? Well, the 1 means I've got one full unit, one full group, and the 7 means I've got 7/10, 7 out of the 10 pieces of the next one. Now what I could do is I could think of that one unit as being 10/10 and another 7/10. So I could also say that if I've got one full group of 10/10 and another 7/10, I could also say that that's the same as 17/10. I could take a bigger number, tens, units, tenths, 24.6. So the 2 in the tens column means 20, 2 groups of 10. The 4 in the units means 4 whole things, so another 4. 0.6 means I've got 6/10 as well. Now do you remember the difference, how we write the difference between tens and tenths? So groups of 10 are written as a capital T, tenths. When I've taken one thing and cut it into 10 smaller parts, they become the small t. Now sometimes instead of writing tens units and putting a small t for tenths, sometimes we can write it down that way. It's exactly the same thing. But a small t means tenths. Now P6, that's all the work that we covered before the half-term break. If there's anything there that you've forgotten about, why don't you go back and watch some of the other videos from before half-term. Now, what we were also doing before half-term was we were beginning to think about adding and subtracting our tenths. So let's have a go at these two questions. What if I had a question that said 9.6 add 14.7? So I'm going to add them together. And when I add together, we can reorder the numbers. I always like when I'm adding to start with the bigger number. So I'm going to put the 14.7 down first. I'm going to write it down first. And then underneath it, I'm going to put my 9.6. Now, if that's tens, units, and tenths, when I write down my 9.6, I need to be absolutely sure that I put the 9 and the 6 in exactly the right place. So as we learnt before half term, it's really important that we think about the value, the place value of our numbers. So the 9 is the number before the decimal point, it's the units number. The 6 is the tenths. And draw my line, and what's really important is I put my decimal point into the answer before I do my adding. So 7 add 6 is 13. So put down my 3, carry the 1 as I would always do, and I'm carrying it from the tenths into the units. Then I've got 4 plus 9 plus 1. So 9 plus 1 is 10, and 4 more makes 14. So put down the 4, carry over the 1, 1 plus 1, 2. So 9.6 at 14.7 gives me the answer 24.3. If I was doing a takeaway question, so 26.2 take away 7.8. So if I put my place value holders at the top, 26.2, so 2 tens, 6 units, 2 tenths. Take away 7.8, so decimal point, 7.8. Decimal point in for my answer. 2 take away 8, can't do, so I'm going to have to do an exchange. So go over into the next column. The 6 becomes a 5. Carry over your 1. 12 take away 8 is 4. 5 take away 7, can't do that one. 15 take away 7 is 8. And 1 take away nothing, 1. So my final answer would be 18.4. Now, that's what we were looking at before we stopped for half term. Today's lesson, we're going to be thinking about multiplication. Now, to start off with, the first part that we're going to do today is mental maths. So we're going to try and do the first group of questions in our heads, P6. So what if you were given a mental maths question that said 0.6 times 4? Well, what does 0.6 mean? 0.6 simply means I've got 6 tenths. 6 tenths multiplied by 4. What is 6 times 4? Well, 6 times 4 is 24. And if that's 6 tenths times 4, then that means I've got 24 tenths. Now, we know that 10 tenths is the same as 1 whole thing. So if I've got 24 tenths, well, that's the same as 2 groups of 10. 10 and 10 makes 20, so that's 2 whole things, and I've still got 4 tenths left over. So I've got 1, add 4 tenths. So altogether that 24 tenths becomes 2 whole things and 4 tenths, 2.4. 6 tenths times 4 is 24 tenths. take those 24 tenths, the 20 becomes 2 whole units, 2, 4 tenths left over, 0.4. If I was given this one, 1.2 times 3. Well, I could do it in a couple of ways, but I could think of it like this. If I've got 1 unit, because there's my units number, so if I took the 1 unit and I multiplied it by 3, I'm going to get 3. 2 tenths times 3, well 2 times 3 is 6, and that's tenths. So if I take my 2 answers, I've got 3 and 6 tenths. As a decimal, that's going to be written as 3.6. Now P6, for your first part today, I want you to go and download the first activity, which is this one. And everybody's doing this activity together. And what I want you to have a go at is doing exactly what we were just doing there, multiplying mentally. There's an example up at the top of the page, and then go and have a go at these questions, in particular part 1 and part 2. Once you've had a go at those, then we're going to make the questions a little bit harder, but you're not going to have to do them mentally because we're going to practice doing these questions vertically. We're going to do some vertical calculations because when the numbers get bigger, sometimes we'll have to write down the question. So 7.3 times 7. Well, if I wanted to write that out as a vertical calculation, I'm simply going to put my 7.3 on the top and I'm going to multiply it by 7. Now, I'm not putting a decimal point beside the 7 that I'm multiplying by. I'm not multiplying it by 0.7. I'm multiplying it by 7 full groups. There is no decimal point there, but I will need a decimal point in my answer. So if I take my 7.3 and I multiply it by 7, then I'm going to work as I normally would. 7 times 3 is 21. 7 times 7 is 49. And 2 more, 51. So I've taken my horizontal calculation and I've turned it into a vertical calculation instead. What about in the next one? Let's make the numbers a little bit bigger again. 29.4 times 5. So we'll take our 29.4, we'll multiply it by 5. I'm not putting a decimal point into the times 5 line, but I am putting 1 into the answer. And then we multiply. So 5 times 4 is 20. So put down your 0, carry the 2, so it's under the 9 because that's the next number we're multiplying. 5 times 9 is 45, and 2 more, 47. 5 times 2, yeah, that's 10, and 4 more, 14. So what does the final answer say, P6? 147.0. Now, 147.0, 0.0 means I've got the full 147 and I don't have anything else after it. When I call out that answer, I could say 147.0, but you know, it would also be okay just to say that answer as 147. I could stop at that point. What you're going to do next, P6, is you're going to go and choose an activity. If you choose to do the higher level activity, you're going to choose this page and you're going to set it out just like we were doing on the practice questions there, where you're going to be multiplying and setting it out as a vertical calculation, just like in these ones. If you choose to do the lower level activity, then similar idea. You're going to download this page and again, set your questions out vertically. Now, at the bottom of your page, it doesn't matter which challenge you choose, whether you choose the higher level challenge or you choose the lower level challenge, Your final questions are about multiplying by 10. Now, earlier on in P6, we thought a lot about multiplying by 10. And we learned that to multiply by 10, we move each digit one place to the left. So if I took a number like 8, and I said to you, what's 8 times 10? Well, 8 times 10 is 80. What happened when I multiplied 8 by 10? The 8 moved from the units into the tens. It moved to the left one place. And what did we put in its place? We put in a 0. So the 8 became 80. The 8 moved across and we put in a 0. What if I took a number like 54 and I said to you, what's 54 times 10? Well, we would take the 5, move it from the tens into the hundreds. The 4 moves from the units into the tens. Put a 0 in the empty space. So what's 54 times 10? It's 540. Let's do one more. What if I had hundreds, tens and units numbers? So what if I had the number 895? And I said to you, what's 895 times 10? Well, when I multiply it by 10, take each number, move it one space over. So the 8 moves into the thousands, the 9 into the hundreds, the 5 goes into the tens, a 0 into the units. How would I say that number? 8,950. Now, the same rule applies when we multiply decimal numbers by 10. If I had a decimal number and I had the decimal number at 0.7, if I'm multiplying it by 10, I do exactly the same thing. The 7 at the minute is in the tenths column. It's going to jump over one space. It's going to go into the units. And in the empty space, I put a 0. So 7 tenths, 0.7 times 10 becomes 7 or 7.0. If I had the number 12.2 and I want to multiply it by 10, then again I take each number and I move it over. So that 1 is in the tens, move it into the hundreds. The 2 moves into the tens. This 2 that's in the tenths moves into the units. Decimal point 0, 12.2 times 10 becomes 122.0. For your final questions today, P6, no matter which activity you choose, whether you choose to do the lower level activity or whether you choose to do the higher level activity, your final questions are all to do with multiplying by 10. So think, move each number one space to the left. Mums and dads, don't let us move the decimal point, please. The decimal point doesn't move, it's the digits themselves that move. P6, once you've had a go at all of those activities, oh my goodness, you will have worked hard for today, but this is really important. Once you've finished all of that, you've got 2 other challenges to have a look at today. The first one is have a go at your reasoning activity, and today's reasoning activity is all to do with perimeter. And then if you've still got some time, why don't you go on to Prodigy and go and test all those mental maths skills that you have. Have a lovely day, P6.